Hi, this is Jim Breon, and welcome to this YouTube channel where we discuss all things mental health. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and also a licensed professional clinical counselor in Orange County, California. What the topic is today is limerence. Limerence is a really kind of a fascinating psychological issue, probably something that many people are not really familiar with. Some people may have never actually heard the word. Limerence, to a certain extent, is what happens often when people start to develop an infatuation with a person. And it can be a normal part of that type of transitioning into a relationship, but it can also become very problematic and even pathological. Now, I want to explore what limerence is. So essentially, limerence is an involuntary obsession with another person. It's what happens when someone meets somebody, or maybe they don't even meet them physically, but they see them through social media, but they start to develop a real obsession with them, a fixation. And it's, like I say, it's often something that's felt at the beginning of a romantic relationship. And if people can work through that stage of limerence and mature it into a more mature, healthy relationship, then the limerence subsides and a healthier version of relationship takes its place. Limerence is not love. It's not lust, and it's not sexual desire. In fact, often when somebody has a limerent object, in other words, a person that they project all kinds of their positive projections onto, they're often actually not even concerned with the well-being of the other person. They're concerned about their own uncertainty that the other person feels the same way about them. So it's really not what we think of as love, where you care for another person, you want to nurture them, and you want their well-being. Limerence is really a desire to be desired, and it's almost always one-sided. That's one of the big problems, is that it often causes a lot of suffering because it's unrequited. Somebody who is putting all of their positive projections onto another person, somebody that we would call a limerent object, the person doing the projecting can have ecstatic, obsessive, intrusive thoughts even about the other person. And it starts to feel more like you're in a fight-flight mode than you're in a love mode. Brain chemistry starts to change, serotonin levels are decreased, so you become obsessive, and then oxytocin levels start to increase, so you have an obsession with wanting to be around that person. Limerence and patterns in limerence are often tied to trauma, including childhood trauma, complex trauma, attachment trauma, PTSD, and OCD. And some people see some connections even to autism spectrum disorder and forms of ADHD. And limerence, eventually, it goes through different stages, and eventually it ends in either what researchers term consummation, starvation, or transference. And I'll go into what those different words mean. So limerence, when people become obsessed with another person, it's based on the projections that they put onto this other person. And they're often irrational, overly positive projections involving fantasy and preoccupation. Like I say, not love. And it's really not about the other person. It's about the projections that they put onto them. Sometimes they don't even know that other person. And frankly, when limerence starts, you don't know that person. There's a fixation as to whether they desire you also. And it creates a lot of uncertainty, which is where you see the primary connection with OCD, because the primary struggle with somebody who struggles with OCD is dealing with uncertainty. They have to be certain about stuff. It can make the person feel ecstatic, passionate, but can also cause a lot of suffering, especially if the fixation is unrequited. So limerence doesn't require a sexual attraction, and you do have to be able in some way or another to be able to see yourself with that person. And the limerence can really intensify if there's any kind of hint that the other person is reciprocating your feelings. It can actually boost the person's self-esteem, but cause agony and suffering if it doesn't. This ecstatic, intense obsession is really the core of what we think of as limerence. So what does limerence feel like? There are these intrusive thoughts. Often a person has a racing heartbeat. They might be psychomotor disturbance. They might might be on edge a lot, feeling anxiety, fear of saying the wrong thing and turning that person off or pushing them away. A person in limerence can be highly self-conscious and highly focused on themselves as well, hyper aware of themselves, obsessing about every word that they say and every action that they do. The uncertainty is a necessary part of limerence, and the person may actually hide their true feelings for fear that they might turn the person off until they get to a point where they feel like they can communicate those feelings to the other person. But that starts to bring in a lot of risk. So again, limerence is not love, because when you're in love with somebody, you're actually concerned about that other person and their well-being. Whereas in limerence, that isn't necessarily the case. So limerence is not selfless. It's really a fixation that often moves beyond reality. So there's this mental obsession over whether the other person feels the same way as you do. People that have studied this phenomenon see different stages that people go through in limerence. And one model for understanding limerence talks about 3 stages of infatuation, what they call crystallization, and then deterioration. Infatuation is when all of those positive projections are being put onto somebody. Crystallization is when the obsession starts to really develop and anxiety increases and the intensity of feelings increases. And that's a big driver of limerence, is that intensity. Deterioration is what happens when either the idealization wears off and you stop idealizing that person, or maybe the feelings just start to decrease. Often what will happen is somebody will then shift their obsession to another object, another person. It's something we call transference, and it's one of the ways that limerence ends. The 3 ways that we understand limerence to end are through terms that we use called consummation, starvation, or transference. Consummation is what happens when the person that you're obsessing over starts to respond positively to you and then starts to show an interest in you, and then a real relationship starts to begin. And then the spell of limerence is broken. Often there's a period of what we call starvation, where there's never any reciprocity, your fixation is unrequited, and then maybe you lose hope and those feelings die. That can lead to intense sadness and grief. And then a lot of times there's transference, where the person that their fixation with another person is not reciprocated, so they transfer that obsession to another person. This is what we often see in patterns of love addiction. So limerence, how long does it last? Generally, it might last a few weeks. It could last up to years. For some people, it can really last a lifetime, especially when people repeat this pattern with multiple people and that transference happens again and again. Limerence can happen in anyone, and to some extent, it can be considered somewhat normal as long as it doesn't persist for a very long time and it doesn't start to become highly irrational. There are a lot of correlations with people who tend to fall into limerence, people who have higher levels of anxiety, depression, or substance use. And there are also connections to trauma, childhood abandonment, neglect, PTSD, and OCD. Often people that have a tendency towards dissociation can fall into limerence. And when you see a person who's had a history of seeking unavailable partners, there's often a level of anxious attachment or fearful avoidant attachment in people that get trapped into patterns of limerence. So what can you do if you're trapped in limerence? One thing you can do is talk to trusted others, talk to people who can maybe help you to see the irrationality of some of your focus on another person and help you maybe kind of talk you down, so to speak. I think as with most things, recognizing it and being able to name it so you can tame it is a first step. Understanding what limerence is and how it's showing up in your life. Questioning, am I mistaking, limerence for sexual attraction or love, and understanding the differences. Limerence tends to be very cognitive. It's based in obsessive thoughts, whereas sexual attraction is more somatic. It's more embodied. They're feelings that you feel as opposed to thoughts that you have. And most people need to feel actually a sense of safety and relaxation in order for sexual attraction or excitement to start taking over, whereas someone who's stuck in a limerence pattern tends to be very anxious about it. So limerence feels much more like a fight-flight mode. It sort of reminds me of an old song where the lyrics say, I want you to want me, I need you to need me. And one of the confusing things, whether it's limerence or real desire is that often people learn through conditioning, imprinting, lots of different ways to have sex in very disembodied ways, separating intimacy from sexuality. And these are some ways that people can really become very confused and feel that they can't tell the difference between love and infatuation. So asking yourself those questions, is this love that I'm feeling, or is it just intensity that I'm feeling addicted to? And making a commitment to see the other person realistically as a limited, flawed human being, just like everyone else. And then gradually learning to express yourself authentically to that person, maybe offering them sincere appreciations for specific things that they have done for you, rather than simply projecting things onto them. Being able to even share frustrations with the other person so that you're meeting them sort of where they're at, rather than projecting all kinds of things onto them. Because remember that you can't really have a real relationship with somebody that you put on a pedestal. And that's a trap that people can find themselves in, because when you're putting another person on a pedestal and looking at them that way, it keeps you from really being seen, from really being understood for who you are. And that's often a person's biggest fear. And this is where we start to look at patterns of insecure attachment. So it actually perpetuates a person's deepest fear. Limerence can often provide distractions from the pain of disconnection or trauma. And if you find that it's a pattern and it's affecting your life, then find a therapist who understands some of these relational patterns and can help you learn to break out of these unhealthy patterns and form healthier relationships. Because limerence can actually override the willingness to develop deeper, genuine attachments, and people can be stuck in those patterns for years. I hope the videos are helpful for you, and I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are and to hear some of your comments. So leave comments and start a discussion and let me know what you might want to hear about. I encourage you to like and subscribe and sign up for notifications. Until the next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other. Bye-bye.